I think we will go ahead and get started. All right, so today we will go ahead and look at the email designer as well as the survey designer that exist within Cvent Flex, and two tools that I actually think are pretty intuitive. Of course, that slight learning curve, but after that, after I've gotten in there, any of my moments going back to Classic, I tend to have complaints about it actually. So really enjoying that new Flex experience. So I do want to just cover very quickly, as existing users, you should be well aware of these different communications, but just want to make sure we all have the same terminology as I chat about them today. And so those pre-event emails in category 1 really capture invitations as well as reminder invitations. Whereas once you move on to phase 2, once somebody actually registers for an event, you'd be firing off a registration confirmation. Another good example of one of those post-registration emails would be a know before you go, sending just in advance of the event. I think 3 is often a category that gets forgotten about or perhaps not even used in some cases, are declined registration emails. So if somebody has already registered and they go and cancel that, it's not uncommon to send a cancellation confirmation message at that point. But you also have the ability to look at regrets or send a regret if somebody tells you they're not coming. You could follow up on that. And then moving into 4, post-event emails. So event feedback is probably the most common post-event email that I see. And of course, appropriate with today, us talking about surveys in combination with those emails. I know not everyone on the line is a Marketing Cloud user, but of course, use this as an example because it really helps ensure CAN-SPAM compliance across the university. And so just really want to call out that category 1 of pre-event emails, while I'm mentioning it today, those invitations or an invitation reminder, those really are going out of Marketing Cloud. Cvent does have the functionality. At CU, we do not want to use it. And for this reason, we want those invites and those commercial messages going out of our Marketing Cloud instance so that people can manage their preferences. So we will focus more on these post-registration emails, all the way through those declined registration emails, those post-event emails. Those can all go through Cvent. And the reason for that is once somebody registers for your event, those communications are considered transactional in nature, and folks do not have to opt out. If there's ever any confusion on that bit, of course, I'm happy to take questions on it, and your eComm specialists are well versed in those things as well. So I'm actually going to go ahead and pop into Cvent and just look at this stuff in real time. So I'm already in Cvent here. Just a little note, if you haven't gone ahead and checked out the new experience, very similar functionality, just a slightly different look. No pressure on moving to that, but eventually that will be the move forward. So in the future, I will be showing my trainings through that view, but I'll hold off for today and my next session. Anyway, I will go ahead and open up an event that I've been playing with, and the same one that I presented at the last training. And with today's focus, I am going to go ahead and look under promotion and communication and event emails, in that second column. So if you've used one of the templates that we've created, we have added some of that language in there of do not use, just a nice reminder that those are communications that should not be going out of Cvent. But this looks very, very similar to Classic. You might not really know you're in a different environment, but we are in Flex. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up one of these emails, in this case, a registration confirmation. and go through these tabs first before we actually look at the designer. So within this details tab, this is where you're going to control the subject line. Highly encourage using data tags wherever possible. Really quick way to get this custom information added to your email. So I very much like to rely on the searching function here. Often, right, date, something generic, you're going to get a lot of different things in there. But once you have the data tag that you want to add, even fancier, like some of these where you can actually format the date exactly as you want. And once it's checked there, it's really easy to just go ahead and add it. Do be mindful of how spaces are presented in there, in between other words, I guess. And very similar from that from name. So those templates should have first name, last name in there. So long as you put that planner first name, last name in there, this is not really something you should have to think about. I do want to have a specific note, and I've had this confuse people in the past. When you initially configure your event, you select that event planner, that email address, it automatically gets carried into every single email. And so if at any point you then have to reset that in configuration, it is not carried through the line at that point. So if you changed that event planner email in the configuration after that initial setup, you do need to go back into each individual email, all of those that are active, and just make sure the from email address is correct. Seen that accident quite often. I'm not going to save anything on there, but I will pivot on over to the second tab of advanced settings. Not sure how many people are using this. I use it sometimes on some of those smaller events, that if an event planner really wants to know every time somebody registers and to get copied on that, probably for smaller events, very VIP sort of events, that is an option in advanced settings. But you can also just preview that. So a really nice way to confirm that how you used your data tags in the subject line is rendering correctly. An important note up here that this is a space where you can go ahead and send these emails manually. And another one that I think often is overlooked, if you ever want to create a brand new email, and you've probably put some work into getting this email looking good, maybe you just need a couple tweaks to it, you can just go ahead and duplicate it rather than starting from scratch. A couple of tips there. So I will go ahead and open up the site designer, or sorry, the email designer. I'm probably going to trip that up a couple of times, but we can navigate there from this green design email button after we've opened a specific email, or where I was earlier, just in event emails. I think oftentimes I just pop right in here and go directly to the email designer. So the good thing about the two designers that we're reviewing today, the email designer and the survey designer, is that a lot of the functionality is very similar to the website designer. So some of those elements include this navigation up here at the top. That they go in the same order, these pre-event emails that had opened by default, but I can navigate down to my registration confirmation email. And I was playing with some things earlier, hence all of this. I did not think I saved, but apparently I did. So I think this piece is hidden on these emails. There's a little gear next to them, which kind of has these email settings. And so you have the option whether or not you want the header and the footer to apply to a specific email. I honestly don't have a good use case for not having the header and footer in there. Be curious if anybody else does, but I think more important, if you are somebody who's looking at these reports to see who's clicking on either these buttons in here or something like that, in order for those reports to work, you do need to enable click tracking. So by default, that is not enabled, and I think just kind of a storage thing, but you're welcome to turn those on. So I know I already mentioned the header and footer, and this is by far one of my favorite pieces. And I was able to just click into that box. You can also navigate to it in this navigation. It's always at the bottom. But the recommendation here is just go ahead and add at minimum your logo. Do be sure to utilize that image alt text. In this case, just indicating it's a University of Colorado logo. And you do have the option to build this out further. Maybe you want to add your event image in here as well. Some other common things that you might want to add some text in there. And if it's consistent across all emails, by all means, my efficient advice would be go ahead and add it in the header and footer. And the footer, pretty straightforward. I'm just keeping that sincerely in there, letting them know who it's coming from. I will pop back over to just this registration confirmation. And as I said, I was intending on pulling in some of these things. I think these are the less commonly used assets, or I haven't, especially not with not having in-person events, like the barcode or QR code. The idea is there, if people are printing off these tickets, you could scan that on your phone with the On Arrival app, and it would automatically check people in. So for the most part, I've just been using text and images, but they also have a divider in there, which is just a nice visual element. I've been using that one a fair amount too. I do want to make a note, and this is something that I didn't realize until very, very recently, and maybe you on the line already know this. The theme can be different through the different designers. So when we were in our last sessions, we're looking at the user interface and how to design that registration experience. That site designer theme seems to sit only within that site designer. And I was under the impression it got carried through every designer. So I learned today, one of your first steps when you pop in here, probably go look at the theme. And for the most part, I've just been having it replicate what's on my site. So that one tripped me up a little bit. And same as all these stylings. They're completely separate stylings from what was on your website. But at least all synced up within your emails. Do note, unlike Site Designer, there is not a version history. So you want to go get what you did 10 weeks ago? No, you're not pulling up that email again. But you can preview and get that same mobile view, which I appreciate. I will make one other note, just because we spoke briefly about language management and how that can help with accessibility and that experience. If you do turn on those features, that multi-language, in this event, I enabled Spanish. You have an entire different set of emails to look at. So definitely more accessible for those Spanish speaking folks, but a lot more work on your end. So do balance those things. Don't want people just turning it on and thinking it's perfect. Clearly those need a little bit of work. All righty, I think I went through all of those items, as well as the actual email designer. And we also looked at those available widgets. And I guess I will just make a point on there This is another area that, depending on how big your email is, how involved it is, that you should definitely be using header tags. And that accessibility, that's at the forefront of your mind. If somebody's scanning through this, they would want to see, and let me do this actually, when you bring in a headline, that you can actually see that it's an H2. So that would help for somebody with a screen reader for scanning your email. So those same best practices that we looked at the website would apply to the email. So pretty straightforward on all of those registration confirmations. Just think about somebody's interaction with your event and the entire event life cycle. So when that registration confirmation email comes in, what is the goal? Well, for the most part, you're just letting that person know that registration went through. It didn't fail, right? You're not going to come to the door and get turned away, or the payment didn't fail, things like that. So there are some individuals who at that point in time want to add things to their calendar, get it documented, or going to remember it. And there's other people who, again, just wanted to make sure it went through. They'll deal with details of the event as it approaches. And I feel as if that's becoming more and more normal. And so how do you try to meet both of those types of people? Sometimes take some redundancy, and some of these, it might be redundant for some people, but hopefully overall, it'll help people who might not come to your event get there. So you can let people know what they'll need to get to your event. And even if that's, you will get an email in the future, 4 days before the event, with all the details you need. Make sure people know that and be very transparent. I tend to not add a ton of text to my emails. I like to keep them minimal and instead link to site pages. So I've seen people put a ton of like the keynote speaker details in the email, whereas I choose to link off to that instead, which I'll show you. And very popular, that add to calendar link, which I really love. Quick note, definitely not a deep dive on paid events, and I'm happy to share out a link on paid events and best practices around that if anyone is interested in that or has pressing needs. But did just want to make a note that in that confirmation email is a great time to mention what your refund policy is. Do you accept refunds or not at all? And how they can identify this charge on their credit card. Sometimes we get people canceling the event because it says University of Colorado events, and they just kind of forget about it, or don't associate it to the university for some reason. So that can minimize confusion. I will show you quickly within this registration confirmation email. Navigate on. How I went about adding this add to calendar link. So I do wish it was a little more intuitive. It's almost perfect. So I actually go into a text area and leverage this data tag. It's an outline of a tag. And at that point, you can search for all these tags. So at that point, I do pull in the calendar URL. And once you're able to copy that, it's when I drug in a new button, and that was the link URL. I don't know where I'm going now. And of course, changing that custom link to add to calendar. And then I would go ahead and get rid of it over here. So you can either leverage that button, or sometimes you can do it duplicative. Maybe in this text, you wanted to say add to calendar as well. In the same vein, you can go ahead and link it here. Earlier, I mentioned that instead of putting all like your speaker information here, that you could instead, just as I did, either put a button there that says speakers or link it in the text. But to get that actual URL of the speakers, I do want to show very quickly that within promotion and communication and web links, these URLs are automatically created, and most of us are familiar with that summary URL that we embed in our Marketing Cloud emails. But you can actually create a link if you have other pages that exist on your website. So I have created a speakers page already, and I want that landing page to be the speakers. So now that is the link that I would include in my email rather than all the text for it. So again, thinking of that life cycle, if that's all they needed at the point of the registration confirmation email, later on, start thinking about what is that more pertinent, know before you go information. So generally, we look forward to seeing you for this event at this date and time. Again, what do they need to make it there? Do they need to get on a plane? They need details for that? Or are they just joining a Zoom? So another creative way to kind of that I've seen is, I think before people were stuck on one know before you go message. And I've very much gone on multiple. It depends on your audience and your event. But you can also kind of pivot this into a promotion piece. So at this point, you're only sending it to people who have registered for your event, but maybe you didn't have your speakers announced initially. So what a great way to say to attendees, hey, go read about our keynotes that just got added, and get them back to your site. Start thinking of your event again as it approaches. And again, just want to reiterate, depending on your event, that time frame of when you send these messages is really going to depend. So probably the least common example right now, if people are traveling out of state, things like that, you might look at sending a know before you go a month, 3 months in advance to get people booking. Then you could have a different know before you go, a bit more specific, 1 week, or even the morning of the event. Of course, assuming you were hosting a local event, people are just driving, you can condense those timeframes even further. Kind of that week in advance, reminding people that they registered, and then a day or so in advance. But where I think most of us have landed more in this virtual space is much smaller timeframes. And so really just a day in advance seems enough to often wiggle a schedule around and make sure you can attend those events. I am not going to dig too deep on these, in part my timing, but session emails are available. It's another layer of customizing for your constituents. And sometimes I see folks go down this path and it's not worth it. And I say that because if it's not a wildly different session, it just, right, it's twice as much to manage from the email perspective. So unless it's going to be a value add for you, generally kind of encourage people that event emails will do just fine. But I will make a note that they are in a separate section within Cvent under promotion and communication of just session emails. But they do sync up within the designer or the email designer. So that's nice. So I will pop one more place as far as the feedback surveys, which is under website and registration, in this third column under surveys. And I'm going to, like all of them, just pop into our lovely green button and open this survey designer. So same as what I was alluding to earlier, that this survey designer, the theme is controlled separately. So I had popped in here and it looked totally different from my event, which is what confused me and led me to that conclusion. So you might need to change these themes if it's your first time looking at a survey. But like the other designers, you can drag pieces in from here and your navigation is on the left. So right now we're just looking at the home page, an overview. And this is where our different surveys are listed. But similar to the ability to have session emails, you could have session feedback. When do you want people to be able to start filling it out? Who is allowed to? Just registrants or only participants? So that would depend if you're marking participation or not. So I think most people just go with registrants. And then you're able to associate it to a particular session. So again, really customizing that experience for everybody. So that's gone ahead and opened up this particular survey. And so these are very now survey sort of components that you can drag into here. But pretty intuitive as far as those elements. I will say it also tripped me up why the header and footer that I created is not showing up here. I don't have a good answer for that. And maybe it's just a little buggy thing. But when you do preview them, you can see that same header and footer carried across every single survey. So very efficient once again. All righty. I know these sessions, I've been moving a mile a minute, not necessarily great for y'all following along step by step. So we do have these recordings out there. Actually, let me go ahead and pull up this wiki and I will share it out to everyone right now. So there are other resources from Cvent that are wonderful. I've been getting a lot of information from them myself, regurgitating them in some of these trainings, but the sessions that I'm hosting are listed here as well. So that email and survey one will be there soon, as well as that presentation. Alrighty, I know I am at time. Thank you all for joining. Higher attendance than I was expecting on a Monday. I am delighted. But do reach out if you have any questions, and hopefully I'll see you at 11:30 on Thursday for our final session on just tips and tricks. But if you can't attend, of course, that recording will be made available. Thanks all. Have a good one.